Hello, everyone, and welcome to Coffee, Curiosity, and Effective Experimentation Methods. Hey, folks, I'm Chris Kornman. I'm the Lab and Education Manager at the Crown, and I'm excited to talk a little bit today about curiosity and effective experimentation methods for coffee folks.
The Crown is located at 2523 Broadway in Oakland, California. We're a lab and tasting room, as well as an event space and education center. You can read more about us online. Royal Coffee is the parent company of the Crown, family-owned and operated importer in business since 1978 in the Bay Area. And you are on our website right now.
Today's session is going to take a look at effective tools for making successful coffee experiments. We'll analyze being specific and minimizing our variables, walk through the process of measurement, observation, repetition, analysis, and then repeating the process with additional information in your toolkit, as well as some tricks and tips for guarding against bias. I think that one of the great things about the desire to experiment is that it's really a creative process at its root, and that the inception of it is this drive for curiosity. It's like one of my favorite instincts, that curiosity that can drive innovation and encourage outside the box thinking. And it's such a simple question, why? Answering the why, either in general or in coffee specifically, is never as easy as asking, but just asking the question spurs this curiosity. And I think it's so necessary in the coffee industry, whether your role as a producer or a roaster or a barista or even a consumer. It's the kind of thing that can really drive improvements in processing methods, or motivating new brewing and roasting equipment, or even reshaping the supply chain. So today we're going to look at some strategies for more effective question asking and answering. While the question why is an excellent starting point, it's not enough to cross the finish line. And so we have to start asking more specific questions. Questions like how, which part, and to what extent. Really picking apart the particulars of what's working and what's not. What is it that we're actually trying to answer? For example, as a follow-up question about why espresso flavors are affected by roast degree, you might ask, how do changes in heat application during a roast affect extraction percentage? Or what part of the roast is most critical for perceived sweetness as espresso? By refining that question, you are taking an esoteric query and giving it something more specific, measurable, and real-world applicable. That's the difference between idle wondering and active investigation. You have to give yourself the right question to start your investigative process. Before you start diving right into trying to answer those questions, you're going to need to pick apart the details a little bit, including answering questions about what you already know, or what you think the answer is based on your present experience, and where the gaps are in your knowledge. In the previous example about espresso, we know that the first few minutes of a roast are mostly related to drying green coffee, so we could focus on later segments of a roast, for example. Assuming you're not an MIT graduate with a first-degree understanding of thermodynamic principles behind the Maillard reaction, you'll have to limit your research to whatever tools, observation skills, and reporting abilities are at your disposal. Making sure that you have the right tools to measure is really critical, but also recognizing what you're able to measure and what you're not will help you refine your process as well. Taking stock of your knowledge base also involves a critical step in the scientific method, which is establishing a control group. Basically, you'll need a standard against which to measure your experiments. If your experiment involves a new roast style, for example, you want to have a well-annotated standard roast, your control, against which to compare your new experimental styles. Or perhaps your experiment is about the effective brew ratio on perceived acidity. Starting with a standard ratio, maybe your default brew method, and comparing new methods against the original will enable effective differentiation of results. Lastly, focus your research on as few variables as possible. Changing just one or two factors, the length of your roast, or a single well-recorded heat adjustment, or your ratio of two different brews of the same coffee. This will help you eliminate confusion. The more variables you start introducing, the more opportunities you've made for mistakes and misattributions. For example, if you're interested in figuring out the effect of fermentation time on a washed coffee, start with just 2 batches at 2 different lengths, and don't use different cultivars or batch weights or yeast strains. Make everything in the experiment exactly the same, or as close as possible, except for the variable you're examining. You can always, and should, repeat the experiment later with different variables. Here's a good example of the results of an experiment that had to do with the length of roast and the water activity of a coffee and the sensory perception. A lot of variables at play, but ultimately I was able to eliminate a lot just by choosing a few small things to focus on. First of all, there's only 2 coffees here, 2 roasts of each, the control roast and the slow Maillard roast. The 2 coffees represent opposite ends of the water activity spectrum, so that we're focusing on a single physical variable in that coffee. And then the tasters were asked to rate just 3 attributes: sweetness, acidity, and viscosity. While this is more complex than would be ideal, we've eliminated a ton of variables that could otherwise confuse the results. The next step here would be to repeat these experiments, both the tasting and the roasting, with the same coffees and with different coffees using similar variables. The scientific community is obsessed with repeatability of experiments, and for good reason. Without the ability to replicate results, research is of no benefit to anyone. Repeatability makes theoretical ideas practical for everyone's benefit and serves as proof that the conclusions are valid. So with that in mind, you really are going to have to be a stickler for details. What's the exact amount of coffee you're going to roast? What is your dose and yield ratio for your espresso? What's the temperature of the brew water or the roaster on the drying tables? Measure everything within your reasonable limitations and then do it all again. Were you able to maintain consistent conditions? Were the results the same? If not, then you found another why question to start investigating. Once you've gathered your data, you're going to want to take a look at it and analyze it. What worked and what didn't? Why do you think that those results returned the way that they did? Are there data trends that you can trace? Was there a definitive answer, or just some suggestions of a probability? In a lot of cases, you should be prepared for foggy results that tend to raise more questions than they answer. It's good. It means you're digging into the right direction. Easy answers are rarely adequate and can lead to overconfidence. New questions will guide your research further, slowly refining your results as you repeat your process and giving you more robust answers as you make progress. What we're looking at here is the result of a statistical analysis that cross-examines a number of variables. Predominantly what I was interested in trying to examine in this experiment was the effect of roasting style on extraction percentage in the brew. And so in these coffees that had identical brew specs, we found that some roast styles expressed differences while others did not. And ultimately, what I had to conclude was that the correlation between a low percentage of post-crack development during the roast and a high extraction percentage of coffee in the brew might be completely irrelevant. And so I had to focus my experiments on a different variable. That I decided that based on these results, that post-crack development percentage was not an effective variable in determining the extraction percentage of brewed coffee. There are few greater threats to meaningful research than personal bias. Predisposition towards a certain answer can take many forms. It's normal to want to confirm your suspicions instead of upending presuppositions. There's even ways that our own minds will try to uphold these pre-existing constructs without our conscious involvement. Not all bias is intentional. One easy way to avoid confirmation bias is to involve a research partner. 2 heads are almost always better than 1. Keep your control and experimental samples blind and keep an open mind, being reasonable with your expectations. Blinding samples can be tricky. Using codes can help. Sometimes creating a double-blind experiment where samples are coded and then recoded to eliminate anyone's knowledge of the answers can be useful. Creating a double-blind cupping isn't that hard. It definitely is going to require a little bit of advanced planning and at least 2 people to keep results secret until the end. In a double-blind experiment, neither the researcher nor the participants is intended to know the variables being examined, and therefore you can approach the analysis without bias. In a cupping, just use rigorous coding and the use of a control sample. In the example on the right, let's say we're looking at the effect on sensory quality of a long control and short roast, left to right. Researcher A, the first partner, will code these samples with one set of coding. It can be simple as A, B, and C. They know the order of these 3 samples, and it's recorded, logged, and kept secret. This is where research partner number 2 comes in. The coded samples will be handed off to the second partner, and they'll be responsible for generating a new code. The use of a randomized alphabetic or numerical coding system can help to prevent bias that might be associated with single numerals, and is highly recommended for this type of experimentation. Once the second research partner has coded the samples again and randomized the order again, then both participants can join in the sample evaluation without knowing what the original coded samples are. Once the research is complete, the tasting is finished, both research partners can reveal their coded keys and be able to determine which of the numerical values that they're displayed on the table in front of them correlate to the different roast lengths. Lastly, managing your expectations is going to be really critical, because what works for you in your particular environment and circumstances might not work for everyone everywhere. Don't be frustrated when an analysis doesn't give you perfect results either. Dig deeper. Be ready to admit the complicated nature of both experimentation in general and coffee in particular. Let's say you settle on a conclusion, for example, after many rounds of testing, that roasting a dry processed Brazilian coffee more slowly through first crack produces sweeter espresso when you pull shots at a 2-to-1 ratio, as an example. Even though you've isolated many variables, the process, the country of origin, a short time frame during the roast, the ratio of coffee to water, a single sensory element, there's still a lot of factors that could still be playing important roles. Implicit assumptions in your conclusion might include the make and model of your roaster and your espresso machine, the ambient temperature and humidity of your environment, the particular coffees you tested, your personal preference in terms of flavor, the mineral content of the water, many other factors. Open-minded discussion and analysis, just like starting with good questions, will spur progress and encourage others to join in the investigation. Before closing this session, I just want to acknowledge the appropriate parties involved in making it happen. Elements of the script for this session were drawn from a draft of an early article that ran in Perfect Daily Grind on April 29th, 2017, and then a lightly edited version of that same article was republished with permission on the Royal Coffee blog in October of 2017. All the ideas and thoughts and words, as well as the research presented here, are the intellectual property of Royal Coffee, and the research is my own with the aid of the team here at Royal and also the Crown.
You can, of course, always visit royalcoffee.com and check additional resources there, whether it's Crown Jewels or information on the Crown itself, or our blog for further information and educational materials. And you can always come visit us at 2523 Broadway, or email us at info@royalcoffee.com, or dial the number below to get in touch. Look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for listening.